Hello and welcome back to the Apprentice One-to-One podcast. And Merry Christmas. I'm going to try and get this one out pretty quickly. It's the 23rd of December today, nearly the 22nd, 23rd. And I'll try and make sure we get this out for Christmas Eve. So if you're bored and sad enough, the day before Christmas, we'll be there to fill the gap. How are you, Craig?
Yeah, good. Obviously, looking forward to tonight. A little bit different, and just the two of us because Richard's still partying or away somewhere
Party
doing
season, isn't
sharing
it?
his sparkles, isn't he? So he's off doing that. But good to catch up and just kind of, I guess, set up for the new year where hopefully we'll be back a bit more consistently once all the mad Christmas rush out of the way. But yeah, busy, happy, good. Think I'm all set for Christmas. I'd have to ask the wife. But what about you?
Same, mate. I was sent up here for two purposes. One was to do this podcast, and another was to build some bikes and scooters. So I've been out with the tools. There's a pile of bits over there, so I'm going to have to finish what I've come up to do after we get off this podcast. But it's that time of year, isn't it, where we're all squirreling away trying to finish off bits and pieces at work and do our bits at home. It's not easy when you're out working all the time. But it's good fun. It's good fun. And Richard's got it right because it's much better to be off partying rather than doing any of those things.
But
We've
see,
had a
you've got the different side to me now because your Weaver tool set probably still gets used more than just for IKEA and DIY, whereas that's about all men's as Sunday for these days. So
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I'm starting to get there, to be fair, mate. I mean, I'm starting to get less and less on the tools, it has to be said. In the lead up, I'd say through December, I probably only had 4 days on site doing actual work, which for me isn't very many. I try and at least be 50-50. But I think that's just the nature of our growth and some of the awards and bits and pieces we've been doing, like the college drop you went off to do as well. There's things like that hustling away in the background. So I think it's maybe a natural transition that I'm going to have to get used to. I've got to say I don't like it. I much prefer to be on site with the lads doing actual work. But there you go. There you go. So, in terms of tonight's podcast, I did drop a little question out onto Instagram. We was going to go live actually, but we had enough questions come back to not do that. Just for anything anyone wanted answering, and there's been quite a different range. There's some weird and wonderful ones, as you might expect when you put a public request out. And I said we'd answer them all, so we will cover them. And then I had a little topic that I've been speaking about as well, and we maybe drop somewhere into the middle of all of that just to see what you think, really, Craig. So I'm interested in your view on it. I think it's one of those where it's hard to really say what is the right or wrong way. That's how I'm looking at it for the minute, anyway. But before we get to the list of questions, I thought I'd have a quick catch up with how you've been with work leading up to this. Are you still busy as you was when we last spoke 3 weeks-ish ago?
yeah, I mean it's crazy. It's been a strange year this year for us. We seem to have gone. I think we've almost gone to like the next phase of growth, if you know what I mean, like gone to the next size of company, which you never kind of expect or you always think it's going to end, but it seems to just be getting bigger and bigger and bigger, um, which we don't take for granted. We work hard to keep it going that way, but I thought last week might have been a little bit quieter leading up to Christmas, but it seemed to be just as busy as before, which is good because it means what's hard with my job is if I'm busy now, it's about our boys being busy on site in 3 months' time. So it's how we keep that constant flow going of where we see like say a lull in October, for example, we might not see the effect of that until April, May next year. So it's keeping that constant pace. So not having had as many of those sort of slower times this year from a pricing point of view seems to be good. And we're slowly building a reputation with some new contractors, which has brought in that extra layer of work for us this year, really. So onwards and upwards with them, keep pushing on those projects, keep trying to build a reputation and just keep going. But it's it's been interesting. It's made me think about different jobs in the industry and stuff over the last year anyway, and seeing how we've grown as a company, how hard it is to recruit to certain other jobs outside of just being a traditional spark. For example, I understand from what I see online that finding sparks is still a battle, but how how we I guess my challenge for next year is how do we get that more into the wider market to talk about design,
Yeah.
QSEs. We've been looking for an electrical estimator stroke QS, depending on how you term it, for a while now because they're getting bigger. And it's really hard to find. Like, it seems to be a really niche market to find someone with the experience and the time on the tools, but the will and the want to sit and start pricing and doing that side of the industry. So
I think that's
yeah,
a good message to get into the trainees and apprentices who might be listening, because we do just often go on about this installation electrician gold card, but when you look at the industry as a whole, that's probably not even half of it, is it? There's so many different other options for people to go into, and you've just outlined a couple there. So I mean, how you get that sorted, I don't know. It's a tricky one, isn't it?
I think it's the conversations and using platforms like yours and this and how we do that, because like you look in our company alone, we've got CAD people, we've got designers, we've got project managers, we've got estimators or QSs, depending on how people term the job. We work with lighting companies and lighting designers, and lighting design being another section. Like, each one of those pieces has to take place. I know some of our other companies around sort of our size, maybe slightly bigger, start to have buyers and procurement people. Like, there's a lot of jobs there that maybe aren't being thought about or discussed, which is an area to try and look into, I think, to try and say, well, you might not want to be a spark your whole life. You might, but you might not. And where do you go next? And how do you take those steps? And what are people looking for when it comes to them? Because some are qualifications and some are just experience.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Maybe it's a case of doing like what you did recently, where you went back into the college and kind of engaged with some of the learners. Because I'm thinking, when I was that age and at college, you got no idea what you want to do. I think I had a vague idea. I was interested in electrical stuff, but you could maybe tie people to a career path that suits them a bit better with that early engagement. Just as a thought off the top of my head, and fair play to you for doing that. I think we need a bit more of that. I popped a post on LinkedIn yesterday that's gone a bit better than I was expecting, around kind of people doing stuff proactively and productively to help the things that they don't like. I see a lot of complaints on social media, or maybe it's just my feed, but I certainly see a few where someone will call out the lack of knowledge in electricians of today, or show a bad piece of work and kind of blame them for it. But that's a collective as industry. When I see stuff like that, I don't blame that individual. It's kind of how things are. And if we don't kind of step up and try and help offer an alternative, it's never going to change, is it?
No, and it's the blending of skills that we maybe don't talk about. Like, probably the biggest part of my day job is Excel. We're still old school. I know you've got softwares, I know you've got functions, but a lot of what we price and its projects of all values is done on Excel and formulas, and building that process and reading the documents, pulling out the key bits, understanding the regs. That, because we had one last week. It's a high-rise building. It's been deemed as a high-risk building. It needs AFDDs. By the time we've gone through design and install, it's in around 25 grand worth of AFDDs. If you miss that, that's a big bill to swallow.
Manufacturer's going to like it.
It's horrible Siemens. So it's the usual boards into a building that you find when you go to an empty shell, and it's but that, if I've got someone that misses that because they've not looked at that knowledge, that could cost us a lot of money. So it's the other sides of it, outside of just passing your NVQ or just passing your AM2, your apprenticeship, that you need to be thinking about in your earlier days of your career, I think.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, if you are listening to this and you kind of, you are interested in being an electrician, clearly, if you're on that training path, it's not all about just getting your impact drivers out and your screwdrivers and your croppers out. There are so many other different roles that are just as needed, and you might find yourself enjoying that a bit more than the other. I think there's a lot of employers out there now who kind of seem to be coming round to the chain of thought that you kind of got to train internally, because there's just not the skills out there to recruit. Basically, I think there's been this systemic approach of larger main contractors, to be fair, who wanted to recruit qualified electricians and didn't really put the work in training enough people. to come along afterwards. And then the same with the smaller contractors who are having their margins trimmed ever tighter, and it becomes really quite difficult. I think COVID played a part in this as well, to then recruit and train people. So we've kind of got this void, this space where, there's no one been trained, but we want people who are trained. It's weird, isn't it? So quite how that's going to sort itself out, I'm not sure. Hopefully the industry of things can do something to turbocharge it, or government come up with some funding for employers. I think that would be a big shift. But they just seem to want to take money out of businesses at the minute rather than put it into it. So as a political thing. But we'll get into some of these questions anyway, if you're ready for them, Greg. We'll start with one of the more common ones, I think, that I get in quite a lot. And it's to do with adult retrainees. And it's, what's the best route as an adult learner these days that doesn't involve an apprenticeship? And I get that asked that so often, because there's a lot of people who want to transition to our industry. So is there a best route in your mind?
What's hard is, I guess, it's how much money have you got, how much time have you got, and what can you do? Because, like, a training provider I worked at not that long ago, you could take a package and you done level 2, you done level 3, you done your 18th edition, you done your NVQ. But you gave up 2 full weekends a month for about 3 years, and then you had to go and do your NVQ post that, effectively. So, no, not 3 years, it was about 18 months. About 18 months, and you've done your NVQ after. So all in all, you could probably be done and have a gold card in about 3 years. But that relies on you getting work, doesn't it? That was costing them probably in the region of 10 to 12 grand to undertake that, fully private, not in a college environment. But you would say they were getting 16 hours of learning a weekend, which, when you start to break it out over that time period, whilst it's not great, there was a lot of expectation on what they had to do outside of the course. It was a lot more hours than some other people are putting forwards. So if you can't afford to give up your day job, I guess there's options like that out there. Or there's evening college groups, but the evening colleges, for me, whilst they work in a way that people get a qualification, you're talking about 6 hours a week, and that doesn't give you a lot of time. So it really comes down to how motivated you are as a learner, I think, as to what way you want to do. I mean, ultimately, the best option for anybody is to be working whilst learning, trying to get the hands-on experience, because having the tickets is one thing, but being able to do anything with them is another. I always used to advocate to the people on courses that I was on, go and be a labourer on a building site. If you're in around London, there's every chance you can get a labourer's job on a building site on somewhere in the region of 130 to 180 pound a day. Like, just go and get on there, because you just experience using tools. You just experience, like, being around that environment, understanding how the day-to-day job works, because the day-to-day job's not for everybody. Like, when you're in some of those environments, when you see some of the stuff going on, you might be 10 grand deep before you realise you don't like working in that sector. So I think for me, it's massively about construction experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be directly electrical experience, but try and get your time on site to just understand that world. And like, having a job whilst you're learning is probably the best way, but I understand that's not the easiest avenue to go down these days.
That's such a good point about getting experience out in construction, because sometimes people are coming from desk jobs, and it can seem like this thing that's brilliant, and you might really enjoy it. It might be brilliant for you, but unless you've experienced it and you've seen that it's early starts, late finishes, you are
cold and wet
in the cold, you do get wet, and it is quite taxing on the body. And once you've maybe had a week of it, you might think, actually, that wasn't really something that I wanted to do. So you've got to be sure about this, because as Craig said, it's a financial outlay. Most likely you're going to be paying for this if you're retraining. And there are a few options where you can do your kind of block release, I suppose, approach. I think those courses are out there where you could set aside a couple of months maybe and just get into it. I'm thinking if it was me personally and I was looking to go to a different sector from where I am now, I would be along the lines of what you've just said, Craig, of trying to do it evenings, weekends, alongside earning money to keep myself afloat, because we're not all blessed with that reserve or cash injection to be able to go through that process. Is all I would say is make sure you do your research on the training provider. TESS have a great resource on their website about rogue trainers. There are some out there who will offer things that aren't real. So maybe speak to your local FE colleges. As an example, you can certainly fire messages over to us through Apprentice One-to-One, or there's the Electrical Careers website that I think TESP also do, and they have a list of approved training providers in the UK. You basically want to make sure it's City and Guilds or EAL kind of approved training, accredited training, because otherwise you're going to come out to the end with a qualification that isn't going to map to a job. The other thing to remember, as Craig just said there as well, the portfolio aspect at the end is often the most difficult part. If you've got that desire to retrain and put the effort in and go through the evenings and the weekends, it's a huge shame to get to that stage and then not be able to complete. But so many people end up in that position. I know, because I speak to a lot of them, where they just can't get that work experience, because employers, like you've just said, Craig, are looking for either skilled people to fill a role or an apprentice fresh out the box to mold into something they want. It's really difficult as that adult retrainee, I think.
But I think we've got to look at what we mean by apprenticeships as well. So if you're looking to be a traditional spark, yes. If you are potentially looking at avenues of some of the other jobs we spoke about briefly a minute ago, well, there's degree apprenticeships. Go and be a design engineer, go and be a QS, go and be, a procurement person. There's lots of different degree apprenticeships out there coming to the market now around construction, around project management, around other jobs that if you are moving from an office environment and maybe want a slightly different office environment but have an interest in the trade, there might be a different job there. I think we're quite good as an industry at focusing on apprenticeships. Means you're 16 and you want to get a gold card and that's all you want to do, when actually there's a lot more agendas coming out. I know when we were looking at recruitment, one of the options I was considering was a degree apprentice coming and taking on a QS job and going through that, being fully accredited at the end. But you have that time, as you say, to develop them. And because they're higher apprenticeships, they come with higher pay and that sort of stuff. There's different avenues. And I seen like UK Power Networks have just released a load of apprenticeships, and their starting salary for apprentices are 35 grand. And you go, well, it's not bad. Like, if you're starting and retraining, you've got to like look at that. But yeah, I think understand the industry you want to join, because if you're my age, let's say just shy of 40, I know I look 21, and you want to come into an industry, are you sure that crawling through with panels and floor voids and whatever else is still what your body wants to be doing at that age, when actually there might be some other jobs that suit you better?
And you've just outlined what someone else has said on one of the questions, actually, Craig, and that was along the lines of, should EAL and City and Guilds do an adult apprenticeship for an installation electrician? I guess they kind of do, because anyone can enrol on an apprenticeship on that pathway, but obviously you're going to have to fund it and such. And as you've just said, there's maybe other options there that people aren't considering.
Well, I think adults can still get the funding for apprenticeships. I need to check. They used to be able to. I think the barrier is more the employer, because the employer has to pay differently if you're over the age of 21 or something, I think, than if you are under 21. So I know when I was last in colleges, they allowed you to do you could get a government loan for a level 3 qualification, which included the NVQ, because the NVQ is level 3. And it worked like a university loan. So whilst you had to take this loan to pay it, the repayment terms were something like £5 a month, depending on how much you were earning. And it was like a sliding scale to pay back that after X amount of years, it was wiped from the system anyway. And most people would probably never pay it back. But that was their way of saying, it's not funded. You take a loan, but actually, in reality, when you looked at the loan, it was next to nothing. But the harder part is a company maybe has to pay, and I'm making numbers up, but say pay £12 an hour compared to £6 an hour, and that's a big commitment for an employer who is looking for an apprenticeship.
Yeah, and that's one of the things where the government really have to step in, and that's an issue at their level, I think, isn't it, where they can maybe support those salaries in some way, or offer an option for an adult retrainee to accept a lower salary, maybe outside of what the national legal limits maybe would be. I think the person who's asked this is maybe more the structure around an apprenticeship, because you need that 30 hours of employment a week, whereas as an adult apprentice, you might be looking to run it around an existing job and still be able to do it on weekends or a couple of days a week. And that might fit some employers as well, actually, just thinking off the top of my head, who don't want to commit to 30 hours a week, being able to separate that down to maybe 10 hours a week and spread it over a 6-7 year period. I don't know. I'm just saying maybe it should be a little bit more flexible. That might be what they were kind of leaning towards in that question. Just second guessing, because I know the person who's asked that. I reckon that will be along those lines. So it's maybe something that the industry of things could explore. They do seem pretty switched on, in fairness, to feedback. And I know there's some structural changes going on with IFIT and stuff that forever seems to be changing with every change of government, which doesn't help, does it? That's something else that the people trying to develop these standards are fighting all the time.
Yeah, because they all come in and have their own ideas. Like, I don't do politics, but I think at one point T levels was the next big thing, and I seen someone else say, well, they'd be scrapping T levels if they got into power, and then nothing, as far as I'm aware, seems to have changed with T levels. So it's like, what's horses for courses, and what are people actually going to do? And these awarding bodies and stuff, I have to try and guess that constantly. It's like, we like someone coming out and saying, there's going to be two sets of regs, one if you work domestic, one if you work commercial, but only if we decide as a committee and we get into power, but then nobody actually does anything once they get voted in. It's like, how do you guess that constantly? It's near on impossible, I think.
It is impossible, isn't it? And those people dealing with it, they're there all the time. They're not changing every 4 or 8 years or whatever. These are people who are doing it for a career, and then dealing with that coming down the chain at them. It's not easy. So yeah, how that gets, I don't know, maybe there should be some sort of legislation that kind of policy decision can't just change every decade. But yeah, like you say, different governments have different ideas, don't they?
And the problem is, and I really don't want to be political because I am the least political person.
Same.
But people aren't in the jobs that they are put into positions to be in charge of. So it's not being teachers, it's not being principals, it's not being people seeing the day-to-day of the cold face of the impact on education. It's a business person looking at numbers on a spreadsheet and saying, well, 2 + 2 must equal 4. And as Sparks, we know more than anybody that everything that should click together and work one way never does it? So it's like,
yeah,
you need to see that cold face. And unfortunately, I don't think government do, because even when they go to these colleges and they go to these events and they go to these things, the college is adamant they've got to put the best foot forward, because you are effectively being inspected. So you don't want to necessarily open up all the warts and nooks and crannies, and that sort of maybe gives a false sense of how things are day to day. You're not showing the students that have been expelled from 4 schools and they want a last chance. You're showing the one that presents and talks properly and comes across in the right manner. And it maybe isn't all the government's fault. They don't see what they don't see. But I think until you change that ethos about it's not inspected on you and you're not going to have money taken off you and it's not about this, then that will always be what happens. And we're almost in a false sense of economy as to what education is actually doing, maybe.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's that's exactly how it goes, isn't it? And it's a hard fight at that level. So yeah, what the answer is there, I think, is beyond any of our pay grades, really, isn't it? It's one of those that is coming right from the top, and all we can hope is that they get it right. There's another
stuff. TESP stuff are fighting those fights, aren't they? They are up there involved in those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these industry bodies get a bashing because it's easy for us, I think, to sit down the chain, and often it's through a lack of communication, maybe that we don't fully understand what is going on. But they are working to try and help in what are difficult areas to navigate. And we see the results. That's all we see. We see this like lack of skills that's out there possibly, and the lack of employment opportunities, and we can all shout and complain about that, but it's not through a lack of effort, I don't think, from the people in the industry of things. Not from the ones of them that I've seen anyway, in some of the standard committees I've taken part in helping form apprenticeship frameworks or funding that's available for these courses. They work and fight really hard on industry's behalf, and sometimes they get a bit of a hard rep and they have to take it quietly. It's just the way it is. Unfortunately, they can't fight back and offer that view because of the organisations they work for, which is a shame sometimes. There's another question dropped in, and it is it's maybe more of a technical one, so we'll go on to that one first. It's about the regs book. So it's somebody saying, should they go to the trouble of marking their regs book up to easily navigate it, or is it better to learn how to use it as it is, naked, so to speak? So I guess as a lecturer, Greg, you've probably seen people sat in your classes with their books all post-it noted up, and other ones where they've just come in with nothing on them.
Yeah, thankfully I've not seen many people naked.
Yeah.
I always say two things with this whenever I've done these courses, whenever I've done students, is it depends on you as a person. I personally have tried highlighting the book and having tabs to every tab you can have, almost to the point where you put a tab on every page. And for me, it gets hard to, I probably spend more time looking at the tabs and looking at the colours and what I do actually looking for the information. I personally prefer to use a method where I look for words in the sort of content. So if it talks about protection, for example, then I'm going to go and start part 4 and see what the next word on the checklist I can find out. So if it says like additional protection, where can I start to find that in my contents page, and use the contents page to guide me almost to the reg. And I think the hidden agenda in the regs books is the contents pages at the start of each chapter. Because when you read a question getting ready for your regs exam, for example, it almost leads you that if you know you've got to be in chapter 41, for example, looking at chapter 41's content page will almost have all the words listed in that question to almost guide you to. So you might go, well, I'm in 411 and I start at dot 1. I've only got to get to, I don't know, let's say dot 5. You've only got like a couple of paragraphs to read to get the information you're looking to. So I personally prefer knowing like the key headers of the regs book to know roughly what chapter to start my conversation in, and then use that second contents page to narrow down my vision. And I still do that like day to day, for example, if I'm looking up regs or getting information, then that's the method I apply. Other people I know that just bewilders them. So I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think it's a case of getting yourself used to your book and what way you prefer to do it.
I think through marking it, you can go through that kind of learning journey of figuring out where everything is. I did a great job. I think it was on the 16th edition with post-it notes, but they change them that often. It becomes an admin task to keep updating it with the different books and then re-tagging it. The thing I found most effective was learning the parts. I think trying to learn the whole book in any kind of sensible way, you need a memory like it's off the scale. But if you can just focus on the parts, remember what each one of those are, that's not a lot of information to take in. And then if you get a question around selection and direction, you know roughly where you're going before you need to dig into the book. But like you said, Craig, it's a personal choice, isn't it? We all learn things differently. We all, take information in differently.
And there's great technology out there. So one that I always used to recommend is an 18th edition app. I'll find the name of it and share it, but that let you do questions either part by part or like an overall exam. I think it cost about £10 to have something like 800 questions unlocked or something. But when you're doing that, it tells you. So if it gave you a question and you didn't get it right, it tells you the regulation and the page number where it is in the book, so you can start to go and find the information. Like you say, start to get used to where it is and how it sits in the book, and get used to keywords indicating set sections and set parts to sort of help you with that. But I think all we're saying really is there's no quick way to understanding the regs book, and it is just a lot of hard hours, unfortunately, learning your way to navigate it for either day to day or for an exam. I mean, I'm already stressing about the 19th edition, and we've got to do that one.
And that's it. You'll learn it and get a handle on it. Then they'll chuck another couple of chapters in, mix it all up, shuffle it about a bit, and say start again. That seems to be the way it goes. So, you're never going to solve this problem. It is going to be ongoing through your career, whether you're in your apprenticeship or as you are where I am now. And, these things do come along and catch you out. They say it's to better serve industry, but I think it's just to catch us out, being honest. There's someone who asked a question actually around the design series we did. They've said that was really useful and thanks for doing it. And they've got a question around cable derating, and it's if your cable's kind of going through different methods of containment and insulation, do you have to derate it in sections or as a whole? And if it is in sections, how do you do that? So that's an interesting question.
Well, we should ask someone technical, shouldn't we?
Richard should be here. He'd know the answer.
No, I think the stance is if it crosses through two things at the same time, then you have to apply both derating factors. Otherwise, you have to apply the worst case derating factor. So if you're in thermal insulation greater than 100 mil thick or whatever, and that's going to knock off 30% of your cable values, and that's the worst figure you've got, then you have to apply it that way and say that, well, the easiest way is to apply it that way based on the worst one before someone tells me I'm wrong. I know that you could go, well, design that cable at that size to that point, put a joint in, design it the next bit for the next bit, put a joint in the next bit for the next bit. I know you can do that, but let's be honest. More joints, more point of failure, it's not worth it. You generally are designing the cable to the worst based conditions that are applied in that circuit. There are ways around it, as with everything, but that is generally the base rule of thumb. But if you've got something where it's, I don't know, in a wall, in a conduit, grouped with other cables, and passing through something else, for example, at the same time, you need to have to apply multiple factors. Otherwise, worst case factor is my understanding anyway.
I'd agree with that. I mean, your cable, if you say it's going through clip direct, but it's going to enter a bit of thermal insulation and be buried by it, that current is going to be carried through that cable at that point, and it needs to be factored in to be able to carry it safely. As you've said, Craig, you could make a disconnect there and put a different cable type in to satisfy that little bit. But by the time you've worked through somebody's home, that's going to get very boring very quickly and probably not satisfy the intent of regs in other places either. So yeah, just apply it for the worst cases. I agree. I mean, if anyone's got a different view, drop them in the comments. But I think that is the right answer. We'll ask Richard later and just double check on that one. There's another technical one actually that's dropped in there, and that is, what's this one here? Well, it's not so much technical, but it's more around the process, I suppose. So I've been told that I can do my AM2 before completing my NVQ after doing the block training course. However, other people have said that isn't the process. So that's as much as they've said on that. My understanding is just to chuck it out there first, because you've gone first all along so far, is that you should do your AM2 right at the end assessment.
My understanding is it's recommended that you do it at the end, but the AM2 is just a unit within your NVQ. So although we talk about it as a separate entity, it is just a unit in your NVQ. I think you can take it anytime you want. The reason it's recommended you take it at the end is because your NVQ is your proof of learning to be able to say that you are competent for all the things they will ask you to undertake as your endpoint assessment, if you like, of undertaking your AM2. So if you take it early, you might not have experienced the skills that you are supposed to have experienced for you your employer, and your training provider to say that you are competent to undertake your AM2, because it's all three people have to sign that form and all three people have to sign that box. So, whilst I don't think anybody can say you cannot do your AM2, you have to be going through that checklist and saying, am I genuinely competent for doing this? And I think the general rule of thumb is, by the time you've completed your NVQ, you should have experienced everything and you should therefore be competent and therefore you should be able to undertake your AM2. And I had previously taught like the prep days for AM2, and the biggest one I would always see as an issue was people would come in and they've never seen an SY cable, never mind using an SY gland. Those that had seen it thought they got glanded with an SWA gland and just got sort of nutted on. So you have to experience that to do your AM2, otherwise you will fail. There's no two ways about it. And maybe that is part of the contributing factor to the results that we see in AM2s currently, who knows. But I think you can do it when you want, but it's recommended at the end because you should be getting the skills and experience to do it.
I think that's a reasoned answer. And yeah, often people would jump to the view that I shared at the start of that, which is why I went first, because that's kind of easy to default to, but there will always be those rare circumstances. You could have somebody who's had no qualifications in industry and all of a sudden decided that they want to go through that training process, but their employer's gone through that checklist and is like, well, we know you can do it. You've been doing it forever. The training provider's seen that as well. And obviously the person going through the training knows what they're capable of. So it might be reasonable that they have been honest in that and decided that they can do it. And as you said, it's a unit in the training. So yeah, there will always be those rare circumstances. So just blanket state, it should be done at the end is maybe wrong. So thank you for correcting me on that one, Craig, as always with, that's, you are right. You are right. Someone else has said here, my assessor has told me to simulate some installs at home. Is this okay, as my employer has said it shouldn't be, but they're not giving me the opportunity at work to fulfill all aspects of the portfolio? And again, that's another common one that I see from people, mainly on retrainee routes, but also apprenticeships. If you end up in like the domestic sector, it's really difficult to have all of the cable and containment areas buttoned up. And we've had people come in here actually to the academy space for help with that. And we've been really honest and, done witness statements saying it is a simulated environment. It's not a work place in the extent of the truest term. However, it is a task that somebody has done legitimately. So it's one of those, isn't it? If you've not got an opportunity to do it, what do people do?
My understanding, and it has been many years since I've read the NVQ guidance, so this could be wrong, but when I was last looking at NVQs, my understanding was it says quite clearly in City and Guilds handbooks, because I've not done EAL, that all assessments needed to be a live job. So I could come to your unit, Mark, and I could hang a bit of tray and say that that's there for you to do a solar panel install at a future date, and I've first fixed the containment. That is a live job, because when I walk out, you're not ripping it down. But if I go and I stick it up in my garage, take a picture and take it down the next day, then that's when it's not a live job. So my understanding, although it may have changed, was live jobs are all that is allowed to be accounted for. But I guess the parameters of what is a live job doesn't mean necessarily on a building site at a working day to day.
Yeah, and I think some people do take it to the extreme, because I've seen the pictures where they've got in basically a 2 meter by 2 meter section of wall, every single type of cable and containment all in one hit, expecting that would satisfy. I think that element is where it's, that's obviously not acceptable, but where somebody's maybe trying to just button up one area that they can't reasonably do in their day job just because that isn't what that company does, there maybe should be some allowance for that, as long as it is installed. I don't know quite how to word it, but yeah, it's installed. It's a pucker job that maybe isn't necessarily something that would need to be getting done otherwise. It's not easy. It's not easy.
It's not easy, and I do agree, but the other side of me as well. The employers signed up, and when you sign up as an employer, you used to have to sit down with a checklist and say, can you confirm that you can meet to show the criteria of X, Y, and
Yes.
Z? And anybody who has an apprentice has sat down and had, or should have sat down and had that conversation and confirmed that they had a way to be able to do that for their apprentice, which is why I personally am a massive advocate for the fact that we are now going a domestic electrician route and a commercial electrician route, for lack of better terms, because you're not, let's be honest, you're not hanging tray and conduits and whatever else in a domestic dwelling 90% of the time, unless you go into one of these big fancy houses with plant rooms and all the rest of it. But, for most people, that's not. So therefore, it's not fair to assess them against that, and it's not fair to put them in that position where they don't have the option to achieve a career that they are looking forward to achieving. So
Yeah.
it's a
And that's,
hard decision.
sorry, Craig, I was going to say that's another strong message to get out into industry, that those options are available. Because I think there's a lot of domestic electricians who have been through that process you've just described and been told, well, you can't really do this because you're not offering the full scope. But now there is a route for them to do it. So it is back on the table, and it will help distinguish employers a little bit, because you could be looking at an installation electrician, Craig, that's got the gold card, and you want to employ them in your company, but they've just been in that domestic setting, and you may be assuming that they know more than they do because there has been this element of fudging, for want of a better term.
But vice versa, because you come to us and we're fortunate we don't do builders work, so our main contractors do that. So you're not going to come and learn off me how to chase into a wall and how to deal with building fabric of a
Yeah, sure.
domestic house, because we don't do it. So it's different skill sets. And I know there's been debates on LinkedIn over the years about how we should all just be this rounded electrician and know everything, not have it divided up and all the rest of it. But I personally think an electrician of 20, 25 years ago is not the same as an electrician of today. And we need to maybe adjust for that, which we are starting to do with the domestic apprenticeship. And I think it has its strengths. I think it has its flaws in the way of we can't move one side to the other, so to speak. Because I'm also not sure I agree with, if you've done the traditional apprenticeship, that you should automatically get to go and cut someone's house apart, because you might not have done those skills either. It's got to look at both sides of the coin.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, they're saying about mapping the domestic electrician standard over to the installation one for people who want to top up and do those units, but equally the other way around, it shouldn't be seen as, well, you've done that, that's like a step backwards. So, you don't need to do any further training. There are other aspects that you will need to cover off. That domestic electrician delves a bit more into renewables than the installation one does, as an example, and certainly domestic-based EV charging. I think when we've got those two paths, I think that works. It does need some ironing out as to, quite how that's going to set out. And then the kind of bolt-on training that comes down the road around renewables. Maybe if you're going into an area like rail or petrochemical or whatever, or like you do, where it's more commercial retail fit out and stuff, that there is additional training that you can go off and do. Can't get all that into an apprenticeship. The lecturers are struggling at 4.5 years just to get those basics in. So, it's unreasonable, I think, of industry to just put ever more into that mixing pot for colleges and employers to deal with. Teaching the basic raw signs and principles and all of the theory side, and then how to get a bit of work done is a rounded apprenticeship, and then the rest comes through experience.
It's almost like we should have at some point in our careers had like a part one, then a part two, and then a C course, and then like...
That's it. If something's broken, why the hell did they change it? It's not broken, why bother changing it? There was a method we had that did work quite effectively. And I think, yeah, it's more complex today just because of the nature of everything being electrified. And we are going to need a lot more people in the next 10 years, a lot more people. And training needs to be right. It's an opportunity, I think, for industry to get it right. There are some shifts that are going to play out in that way, I hope. Someone else has popped another question on, more for employers, this one. So it's, how do I go about actually hiring an apprentice? So it's the process of that. And again, it's one we've covered on other podcasts before. The way I always answer that is to reach out to a local FE college first, because they will usually have people in those places looking for work. You could advertise sort of traditionally newspaper ads on Indeed or whatever for an electrical apprentice, I would always say have those conversations with the lecturers and people at your local FE. What about you, Craig?
I'd say the same, because you need to understand, even if you decide you want to find your own apprentice rather than someone through the college, you need to understand what commitment you have to make as an employer, because there are contractual obligations. So yes, you get somebody at a cheaper rate, but for doing that, you have to commit to X amount of time a week. I think it's 30 hours last I checked. You must be employing them, and that includes them going to college. That means you have to do that time. Otherwise, if you're not, you can cost them the apprenticeship, and therefore any funding you've maybe had might be taken back off you. So I think you need to understand your commitment as an employer. Almost finding the person is probably the last piece to the puzzle, I would suggest.
Yeah, I mean, there's the funding aspect as well. There was some more generous grants through COVID, but now they've all largely gone. I think there is still £1,000 one left for if you're employing someone aged 16 to 18. But by the time you've paid the fees, I think it's about £300 a year or whatever you pay to contribute. If you're a smaller company, that kind of money gets eaten away into that anyway. So they're not going to get any upfront financial injection to recruit an apprentice. So do your numbers properly. You have to treat them as you would any other employee. So it's all of the holiday entitlements, sickness entitlements, the uniform, and the training. You need to deliver elements of training to them and give them an opportunity to qualify in the course of them going to work. It is not just cheap labour to do all of the donkey work for you at a low wage. It's a two-way street, and any FE college will take you through that conversation right at the start, help you with your contracts, help you understand exactly what you need to be doing. And yeah, just go into it with your eyes open, really.
And check simple things like your insurance, your health and safety. You're employing a minor. Not all your sites might let you take them onto site, for example. It's those finer details that you need to understand your commitment. Your insurance premiums will go up if you employ a 16-year-old compared to if everyone's over the age of 18. It's just a fact. It's not trying to put anybody off. It's just the reality.
It's a great point. And we have struggled to get insurance to have anyone under the age of 18 on a scaffold platform with our insurance. That was a difficult conversation. We did actually manage to find someone who would do it. Because obviously, if we was taking a school leaver in the kind of way our business has navigated towards now, that becomes quite difficult if they can't go up onto scaffold platforms. And it's not just that. If you're working in rail or any kind of slightly more risky environment, it gets complicated. So make sure you are doing your research. And again, a lot of FE colleges can help you with that guidance and advice. They certainly did actually. When I first took Matthew on, I remember that conversation because I was naive to all of those kind of things about looking at insurances. So yeah, make sure you do dot your I's and cross your T's on that front. I'm just looking through this list of questions, Craig. I think we've got a couple of stupid ones. So one was, can I become part of the Northern Solar Gang? And yeah, that's an open doors policy. We accept literally anyone, even I am in it.
That's Jamie asking questions.
Yeah, that one actually, Jamie. And this next one, you'd think it would be because someone said, are Unilight any good? So as it's the season of goodwill, I'm going to say that all torch manufacturers are good and they allow us to work in dark places without using matches and lighters. So
I've had a couple of Unilights. I mean, they last a long time because my tool bag never comes out. But from what I've used of them, they've been good and they are helpful. Everyone has their own brand with everything they do, don't they, and what they like and dislike. But I wouldn't say I think they're better than any other torch or equipment. But if you have got them, then
just torches, isn't it? It's just torches. I've gone through that phase. I've had a load of Unilight stuff in the past. Now I've got old Milwaukee batteries, so I just get the ones that go on the batteries. It's easier to keep stuff charged up with one little charging pack that does the whole lot. But there's no right or wrong to that. I'm not going to go dissing any brands on this podcast today. I think that just leaves us with my question. I've left it to the end because it was a bit of a selfish one, and it was around PV Ultra. So for those of you who don't know what PV Ultra is, I'm going to go over it because some people maybe don't understand its construction. This is a normal length of PV Ultra. So this isn't the new super duper steel wire armor version. So we'll just look at this first. But you've basically got an outer, like you would normally see on your kind of steel wire armor. It's a similar material. You've then got an inner bedding, and then you've got 4 cores in this one. So this is for 2 strings, and these are double insulated. So there are two layers of insulation, and you can identify your strings because the inner insulation is black on one and white on the other. And it's a good way of getting PV cables about, because they're an absolute nightmare when they're in their single cable format and you've got to get 4 of these cables basically up to a roof, conduit it all up. This solved the problem. It also comes with its markings on it, so it says live in daylight. You don't have to go sticking stickers over it all. And the innovation of industry has looked to try and solve another problem, and that's to do with transporting DC cables that are buried in the ground. And the hot topic at the minute is PV Ultra SWA. And that brings a few complications, Craig. I've popped some content out on my YouTube channel just to really open up the chat around it. I do have my views, and I just wondered what yours were.
I think we briefly spoke offline about this, didn't we? That there's so many elements to this, isn't there? How they're installed. Is it in a duct? Is it direct in ground? My view is, if it's direct in ground, you would want the arming to be earthed, because you might be bringing other potentials in. Now, I know people will have arguments for double insulation and all the rest of it, and that's fine. But I think at its rawest form, my point of view is that if there's a cable buried direct in ground, you want some sort of earthed metallic component to allow you to keep that potential at the same potential once it comes into an installation somewhere else. Because whilst you're on about DC cables, I also have a thing about submain cables and how we do that. Because if they're coming into the bottom of a metal board, for example, how is that being controlled that there's not a difference of potential from the ground that you are bringing into the building? It's not an area I've spent a lot of time in, especially on the solar and DC side, so I'm not the best person to that. But in its rawest form, I would think it needs to be earthed, personally.
Yeah, I mean, you pointed me at this reg in a chat because your knowledge of the regs is way better than mine, but it's 522.8.10. And it actually says, except where it's installed in a conduit or duct which provides equivalent mechanical protection, a cable buried in the ground shall incorporate an earthed armor or metal sheath or both, suitable for use as a protective conductor. That's the terminology. And it must be earthed. So that's kind of written into that reg, but I guess that's more from the realms of ADS when we're using AC. But you're dead right. If you've got that steel wire armor just buried direct in the ground and that outer jacket gets a nick in it, you are then going to transport that earth potential through the armors into your installation, either down at the array, which if it's ground mount could be in the field somewhere, or if it's on the roof, you could be among the panels with that, but also at your kind of main intake around your inverters and stuff. So there's the different earthing systems then if they're not tied together. And I guess that's, we're maybe looking at this as the DC becoming onto the armors when really there's other things in that mix as well. So for me, and I said this on my little video, I think that the DC armored SWA is a great innovation, but not to bury it direct in the ground, because then you have that problem of having, it's a shall, it's not a should, that you have to earth those armors. Much better would be to run it through a 750N duct, and then the argument is, well, why bother? You could just put this PV Ultra through it. You've got a 750N duct, you've got equivalent mechanical protection of bothering to earth it. Why not just use that? The problem is then when you're out on an array, squirrels and rodents are absolutely excellent at rinsing this stuff. And then all you've got is these flapping around in the breeze with nothing operating. There's no overcurrent protected device going to operate unless they're actually in contact with each other. Your inverters aren't going to shut down or see that as a problem. But if you've got a piece of mechanical protection on there, so some armors, I view it a bit like if you've got that rigid N750N duct in the ground and you're lucky enough to fire through some metal conduit that isn't an exposed or conductive part through there and then fish your DC cables through it. It's a long shot that you can then protect those cables. And that's built into this. And not only that, the actual metal part of it is oversheathed, so no one can really come into contact with it because it's drawn through a duct. You're unlikely to snag it. It's more for if you get a squirrel or a rat chewing at this cable, they're not going to chew through the metal. And then when you're going through your periodic inspections, you'll see that, and some reactive work can be done on it rather than having those live cables just flopping around in free air.
Because don't, and I might have got this wrong, but don't in its rawest form if you've got DC cables going in the ground, don't you have to divorce your earth anyway?
Yeah, I mean, there's a new discussion around all of that now to do with capacitive coupling or parasitic capacitive coupling, where you end up with kind of an AC voltage on your DC strings anyway. So we can make all these efforts to mechanically separate everything, but the way some of these inverters work, they're allowing those currents and voltages into the DC system anyway. So there's an argument of should we be bonding those because of that? You know, I've simulated that again. I do far too many experiments thinking about that while we're chatting. But getting 120 volts, upwards of 120 volts on my solar panels on my shed roof, you know, that's insulated from the mass of earth. It's coming from the inverter. I know where it's actually been leaked into the panels from. It's made a bigger problem because I broke the seal on a panel, so it kind of amplifies it when moisture gets in there. But yeah, it's a really, really tricky one. I think it's this new. Well, it's not new. It's these things have been known about for ages. The default approach is to just bond arrays. That's what people are doing. They're bonding them, be it ground mount, roof mount, when they find this, and it goes away. But we're kind of masking something, I think. But that's a separate discussion to the actual PB Ultra SWA.
Yeah, and I'm not. My next questions, I suppose, because people will hopefully understand. We don't talk about these conversations. This is literally us
literally
discussing on the spot. So
stripped it at Craig under pressure.
I suppose you then go down a line of to bond or not to bond, and you could go down a whole rabbit hole of all of that and how that touches. But if you get more than 120 volts DC,
no AC.
So you're well outside your touch potentials,
yeah, exactly.
and your touch voltage and whatever else. So yeah, it's that's interesting because I suppose then you'll have backfeed coming through that as well. And yeah, there's rabbit holes to head down, but I think in its rawest form, to me, I understand the need for the SWA from protection from rodents because that's part of the regs. It's an external influence under Part 5, isn't it? We have to take them into consideration. I assume it's cheaper to buy armoured SWA than it is to buy and install conduit throughout the run of these installations. So therefore that will be people's point of choice. I personally think I would want to see it earthed if it wasn't in a duct in the ground.
Yeah, I'm on that chain. If you are going to bury it direct, it's a shall in the regs, and then it gets very messy. Or if somebody goes and shoves a digger through it with your DC voltages on there, then coming into contact with those earthed armors, that's a difficult one to navigate past. You know, you can make all the overlays and markings you like. That's tricky. But I think if it's there as mechanical protection and you're inside a duct, and then when you come out of the duct, you've got it's oversheathed, and it's going to stop that problem. It's not an exposed or conductive part at that time. So that's my that's my position. That's where I think its case use is. My worry is that we're going to see this adopted by industry and it's going to get dropped in the ground everywhere, and it'll either be left unearthed, which is not satisfying the intent of the regs, or it will be earthed and then it's not satisfying things in different ways.
I think employees, before I get rinsed, everyone bear in mind my knowledge of solar is shocking. No pun intended. I think that the only reason I would ever bury a cable direct in the ground is if I needed those extra few amps of current carrying capacity, because it's not massive differences between a duct and direct in ground. So, from what I understand from Sam over renewables, because we've been looking at some jobs together, your volt drop on your cable needs to be less than 1%, I think he said, for the inverter to work, which was news to me.
Ideally, that's what you want, yeah.
So he never gave me the option of ideal. He made me go bigger. So so in that situation, the two reasons don't kind of justify from my design, if you know what I mean. Because if your cable's big enough that you're going to get that 1% volt drop as your sort of maximum, then you shouldn't be needing to be going for those extra few amps of current carrying capacity. So therefore, I don't see a logical design reason why the better choice would be to not put it in a duct.
No, and
That's fine.
traditionally, from the ones I've seen on these big solar farms, is they do generally get ducted. The problem they then encounter is when they're drawn through as these single strings or in bundles of, they rub on each other. However big your duct is, it's just the long runs, and you end up getting those abrasions in the cable. However well the ducts are sealed, moisture eventually finds a way, or worse, rodents get in the ducts and chew through them. These PV Ultras, again, that are SWA, you're kind of rubbing on the outer jackets, and at very worst, you might have nicked into that inside a duct where you would then have the armors in contact with each other. And there is some upsides as well in terms of how these inverters see faults for your rapid shutdown. So if you've got a metal jacket around these cables, want a better example, and something horrible does happen inside of a duct, coming into contact with that will force the inverter to see that because they monitor insulation resistance between the strings and trigger a shutdown event. If you then tie it in with something like this, which is a Tiger tap, that can then tell the solar panels to shut down production and not send any voltages into the strings. So I think the industry of things, we're in this place now where we're either working for our ADS as our method of protection, or we're using double and reinforced insulation as a method of protection. And that's kind of the two camps we sit in. And there has to be some common sense discussion about how things actually work out in industry and how some of this technology behaves, and giving us the best prospect of ending in a safe state. It's all right saying don't use, there's no case use for this steel wire armor PV Ultra, don't use it. But then you're just left with a lot of these strings flapping in the breeze or in ducts burning and arcing apart to each other. When if it had been used, you've got more of a prospect of ending up in a safe state. So why wouldn't we try and engineer towards that? And that's my takeaway from it. I think sometimes we're too resistant to some of these new things. We saw it with pen fault detection. We're seeing it with kind of these electronic RCDs, and there's rightful questions around all of that. But sometimes we have to go on that journey of adoption, and maybe we'll get there in the end. But I had wanted to chuck that at you, Craig, because you've got a bigger knowledge of their eggs than I have. I've asked Richard and Jamie as well for their opinions. I won't say what they said on the podcast. That's for them to disclose. And also Sam at Oval. We are going to get into it on the Renewables podcast, and hopefully get Doncaster Cables to come in and have a chat with us about it as well, get the manufacturer's point of view. But I already know it's flying off the shelves. Installers want it. So we'll see how that builds.
I think it's a good solution. I would just personally put it in a duct and earth it to the iron. And I think you'd be okay.
Fair dues. That's the list of questions, including my own very selfish one. So I think we've got through those, and it is the 23rd of December at 8:39 on an evening. So I want to thank you for giving your time up, Craig, and coming and having the chat with us tonight. We are going to be more consistent in the new year. We've got a lot of stuff we want to get into. Mr. Kranis has agreed to come on and have a chat with us. Michael Peace as well. These guys are all working through the draft public comments. I think there's a few people involved in those conversations at the minute, so we'll have to wait till that's out the way. But there'll be some interesting ones to lead into around earthing and bonding. All ties into this, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think my only last question to you is, how have you recovered from your fame and fortune now that you were the ECN's special person of the year for all you've done to industry?
I still don't know how you lot all managed to keep that quiet, because that was like everyone knew about that, and this industry is renowned for its gossiping. So how that was kept quiet, Lord knows. Fair play to you. I was very surprised, actually. I was not expecting that at all. And I still don't know quite how to think about it. The people in the room and the nice things you had to say, and Mr. Hayes as well. Yeah, it was very humbling, but very nice too. It was a nice way to end the year, and I'm very grateful for that. My trophy and certificate's on the mantelpiece at home, so it's not here with me yet, but I will be getting it on the desk.
Well, I think all in all, thank you for your time and your contribution to industry. And I very much look forward to us carrying these on and getting into some interesting topics for next year. And I think if anyone has other ones they want us to do, we will do Earthing and Bond, and I will bring my laptop home over Christmas and get started on some of them, and then get some very clever people that we're fortunate to talk to come and share their views as well, because I don't think there's anybody better than Darren Cranis and Michael Peace who could come and have those conversations, to be perfectly honest, and far more than I know about these topics. So I'm looking forward to learning on them as well.
Yeah, I was reading Michael's articles before we came on tonight, actually. If anyone is interested about ducts and buried cables, he's got a few on wiring matters that are absolutely brilliant. So I'll drop them in the description, actually. And Craig sends me a link to that app he referenced earlier, I'll drop that in below as well. Otherwise, Merry Christmas, Craig. I hope you have a great time with the family at home and you do manage to get your feet up for just a little bit. You sound like you've got a busy year ahead, so get yourself rested. And to anyone who's listened and engaged with the podcast over the last year, thank you very much. These are still well listened to and watched, even though we're a bit more sporadic. I would probably say since sort of October time. We do really appreciate it, and we will be back with some more technical chat. And Rich will be here to do some more mocking about slow boats, I'm sure, in 2025. So Merry Christmas.
He's
and have a great new year.
Santa.
Yeah. Merry Christmas and have a great new year, everyone. And we'll see you on the next one.
Merry Christmas, all.